So, I want to talk a little bit about pathological contrarianism and one particularly egregious example of it that I see. Now, there's a psychological disorder. I believe this is considered an actual psychological disorder officially, according to psychologists and psychiatrists, which is called oppositional defiant disorder, or is it oppositional defiance disorder? I'm not sure which of the two exactly, but basically, what it means is it's a psychological disorder where you always want to do the opposite of what authority figures tell you and believe the opposite of what they say. It could also be called pathological contrarianism. Now, personally, I was never diagnosed as having this, but I do think I probably displayed some signs of it, like some tendencies toward it when I was younger. I don't think that I think that way anymore as I'm older. I think I do have a tendency to point out contradictory and irrational laws and rules that exist, but I don't think that's the same as oppositional defiance disorder, where you literally believe the exact opposite of what the laws are or what the authorities say or what average people believe just for the sake of doing so, which is pathological contrarianism. Now, personally, I think the opposite should also be considered a psychological disorder, pathological blind conformity, but it's not because it's considered positively adaptive. But I would argue that it's not necessarily positively adaptive because it produces a society where people don't think for themselves and where people are very easily misled by tyrants and by tyrannical regimes. So I do think the opposite should be considered a disorder as well, but it's not. Regardless, though, my point is about pathological contrarianism. Um, there are some people on the right who are self-professed pathological contrarians because in this day and age, the default is being a liberal. Like when you look at the mainstream media, the educational system, just what the average person on the street professes to believe, the default these days is liberalism. So being a pathological contrarian in many ways means being right wing. Now, you could argue, well, maybe in some parts of like rural Texas, for instance, being a pathological contrarian would mean being a liberal. Although there it would be a bit more complicated because it's like, yes, on the street, the majority of people, vast majority would be conservative, at least American conservative, which I have my own problems with that ideology. But like the thing is, even there, they still watch the same movies. They may not consume the exact same news media, but they consume the same TV shows, the same movies, the same video games, books, music to some extent, more country music, I would say. But my point is, a lot of the media they consume is still at least somewhat liberal. So like say for instance, they might watch somewhat different shows, but even those shows have some liberal messages. Like say Yellowstone, that's a show that like appeals to red state people, but it also has some liberal messages in it because there's a lot of focus on like the suffering of the Native Americans and stuff like that. So it's like it's a bit more gray there, like what would being a pathological contrarian involve in rural Texas. But my point is, okay, if you live in say urban or suburban southern Ontario, it's very clear that being a pathological contrarian would mean being very much right wing and opposed to everything that liberals say. Now, some people on the right are self-professed pathological contrarians. Like Andrew Anglin on the Daily Stormer blatantly, flagrantly says, you should always do the opposite of what liberals say, believe the opposite of what they believe. And liberals, the mainstream media, the US government, all that. Just do and say the opposite of what they do. Personally, I think pathological contrarianism is not a good idea. Like, if the mainstream media says the sky is blue, does that suddenly mean the sky is green? If mainstream media tells you not to jump off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge? There's a certain point where it's like, okay, even if these people hate us and they want us dead, it doesn't mean that literally every word out of their mouths is a lie. Like, say if they're like reporting on like a cat stuck in a tree, it's like, no, 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 that means it was actually a dog stuck in a tree, or it was a tree stuck in a cat. Always believe the opposite of what they say. Or like, oh, that cat was actually underground. It wasn't in a tree. It was in a sewer. You have to believe the opposite of what they say. Or like the opposite might be, oh, the cat was safe and sound. There was no cat in the tree. Regardless, it's like, okay, just because they lie about bigger picture narratives or whatever, it doesn't mean you should believe literally the opposite of everything they say, no matter how minute. This is where flat earth thinking comes from. It's like, oh, believe the opposite of what the mainstream media says. Well, the mainstream media says the earth is round, therefore the earth must be flat. Now, thankfully, not too many people actually believe the flat earth theories. Although I've seen a much higher number believe, for instance, that like the moon landing was fake. That I have seen a good number of people believing. But I would say what is a much more widespread example of pathological contrarian thinking, and a very insidious example because I've seen otherwise smart people fall prey to this, is reflexively defending the tobacco industry and saying that smoking is healthy. Because I'm seeing a lot of right-wingers saying this, and it is very, very dumb. Okay? Smoking is not good for your health. It is objectively bad for your health. It is very bad for your health. It's a very unhealthy thing to do. I used to smoke cigarettes when I was way younger. I don't think I've smoked a single cigarette in many years. Last time I might have smoked like one cigarette was like 2012, and that was like only one or two. And really, it's been a while since I smoked them regularly. It wasn't very long. It was only like for maybe 1 or 2 years of my life when I was a lot younger. But yeah, like I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke anything. But the thing is, yeah, I mean, the lies that they tell are just too much. Like this idea that smoking cigarettes is healthy is insane. It's not healthy. It's not good for your health. It is very bad for you. And again, they say this like, oh, well, it's because tobacco is demonized by the mainstream media. Therefore, they must be lying about it. It's like, I'm sorry, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. Tobacco is bad for your health. And okay, if you want to believe that, you can go ahead and believe that, get lung cancer. You can go ahead, believe that, and die at age 65 because of how many cigarettes you smoke. But I'm telling you, smoking is bad for your health, and this is a classic case of pathological contrarianism. Now, you could say, well, liberals are hypocritical because they support weed, but they go against tobacco. I would say, yes, they are hypocritical, and that's because both weed and tobacco are bad for your health. It doesn't mean that weed is bad for your health, but tobacco is good for your health. No, actually, they're both unhealthy. And to be fair, some people do recognize that, but you get idiotic, politically charged people on each side of the spectrum standing up for their smoked substance of choice. And it's like, you know what? This is stupid, okay? Making like tobacco versus weed a party lines issue. Like both are objectively bad for your health. The only thing is you could argue that weed is worse in terms of mental health, and also that weed presents a more immediate danger in terms of secondhand smoke, because you can actually get high off secondhand smoke involuntarily without your consent. Whereas, okay, secondhand tobacco smoke can make you cough. It can be bad for people's health. For some people, it even triggers an allergic reaction, which is pretty bad. But like, it won't at least psychologically alter anyone's perception, whereas secondhand weed smoke can. That being said, I think both are very unhealthy, and we shouldn't be shilling for either of them, really. Now, but like shilling for tobacco is just dumb, and people say, well, because it's a traditional thing. It's like, okay, it's traditional dating back how many years? Like it came from the Native Americans, so it's not like we had it before 1492 anyway. And furthermore, it's like, okay, you know what? I'm willing to make exceptions. Like, traditionalism is good most of the time, but occasionally we realize, hey, there's a certain tradition that might be kind of dumb. I'd say the running of the bulls would be another one, but honestly, way more people are killed by tobacco than by the running of the bulls. So I'm willing to more look the other way on the running of the bulls than in the case of tobacco. Um, but yeah, tobacco's bad for your health. You shouldn't smoke it. And also, you shouldn't be a pathological contrarian. This idea that you should always believe the exact opposite of what liberals say in any case whatsoever is just insane and stupid. And you're going to get yourself killed because a liberal is going to say, well, you should look both ways before crossing the street. And then you're like, no, you fucking lib. You fucking shit lib, I'm gonna prove you wrong, and then get hit by a car to own the libs. So it's the same thing, like, oh, smoke 10 cigarettes a day to own the libs. It's like, no, you're just going to be owning yourself.